Comment on the video, where are people watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. In the opening moments of the narrative, we are introduced to a seemingly ordinary morning that quickly turns confrontational. The scene unfolds with David Hayes, a proud veteran and devoted father of two, waking up to a bewildering sight. His lovingly maintained lawn has been transformed into an unauthorized parking lot by his neighbor's car. This jarring discovery immediately sets a tone of intrusion and disrespect, as what was once a personal sanctuary now serves as evidence of boundary violations. As the first rays of light gently filter through the windows of his suburban home, the narrative paints a vivid picture of a peaceful, almost idyllic environment. The soft hum of birdsong underscores a sense of tranquility that has been carefully cultivated over the years through hard work and dedication. David's lawn is more than just a patch of grass. It is a living testament to his commitment and a safe haven where his family has grown and thrived. This contrast between the serene morning and the sudden disruption highlights the stark intrusion into his personal space. Immediately disturbed by the sight of the errant vehicle parked in the middle of his lawn, David's response is both measured and resolute. Rather than reacting impulsively, he approaches the situation with a clear sense of purpose. His first step is to seek help from the homeowners association by reaching out to its chairperson, Karen. However, Karen dismisses his concerns with a smug smile and an air of unassailable authority. Her reaction is significant. It not only reinforces the bureaucratic indifference that often accompanies overbearing HOAs but also underscores a wider problem in the community: those in power may refuse to acknowledge legitimate grievances. Unbeknownst to Karen, however, David is not one to be easily dismissed. His calm exterior conceals a determined resolve to document every detail of the violation. By quietly gathering evidence, taking photographs of the car, noting tire tracks, and recording the incident, David is methodically preparing to expose the truth behind the HOA's lax oversight and his neighbor's blatant disregard for his property. This act of secretly compiling proof is crucial. It not only demonstrates his resourcefulness but also sets the stage for what becomes a much larger confrontation between an individual standing up for his rights and a system that dismisses his concerns. The beginning of the narrative, therefore, establishes several key themes. First, it contrasts the idyllic, carefully maintained suburban life with the intrusion of unwarranted authority and disrespect. David's pristine lawn symbolizes the personal pride and effort that is undermined by both his neighbor's careless behavior and an indifferent HOA. Second, it sets up the conflict between the individual and established power. Karen's dismissive behavior reflects the common frustration with bureaucracies that prioritize control over genuine community welfare. Finally, the narrative highlights the importance of documentation and evidence as tools for personal defense, foreshadowing that David's quiet resolve will eventually lead to a larger community confrontation. After the unsettling discovery in Part 1, Daniel Morgan spent the remainder of that early morning in a state of disbelief. His sanctuary, a meticulously groomed lawn that he had nurtured for years, had been defaced by the unwelcome presence of Eric Turner's SUV. As the first light of day bathed the suburban street in a gentle glow, Daniel stood on his front porch, cradling a steaming cup of coffee, his eyes fixed on the intruder now fading into the distance. The neighborhood, which typically resonated with the chirping of birds and the soft rustle of leaves, now seemed ominously quiet. Every detail of his cherished outdoor space, the vibrant green grass, the carefully trimmed hedges, and the delicate flower beds he had planted, felt violated. For Daniel, this wasn't merely about an errant parking decision. It was about the sanctity of his home being sullied by someone who appeared to lack any respect for personal boundaries. In that moment, Daniel's mind raced back to the countless hours he had invested in creating this haven for his family, a place that served as a respite from the pressures of daily life and a testament to his lifelong commitment to order and beauty. The intrusion by Eric Turner's vehicle, with its scuffed paint and out-of-place tires, shattered the illusion of suburban calm. Standing on his porch, Daniel silently resolved not to let this act of disrespect slide. Though he felt a pang of irritation and disappointment, he composed himself with the calm of a seasoned veteran who understood that small violations, if ignored, could erode one's peace over time. Determined to protect what was rightfully his, he decided to document every detail. He fetched his digital camera and began snapping pictures of the offending SUV parked squarely in the middle of his lawn. Every angle, every stray tire mark, was recorded meticulously, evidence that would later be vital in asserting his rights. As the day advanced and neighbors began to stir, Daniel also noticed subtle signs that the disturbance was not an isolated incident. Traces of tire tracks led along the edges of his garden, hinting that this unauthorized parking might have been a repeated offense. With each new mark, Daniel's resolve grew stronger. He knew that if no one challenged Eric Turner's disregard for his property, it would only embolden further transgressions. That morning's calm, once a source of joy and reflection, had transformed into a catalyst for action. Daniel's first steps, observing, recording, and preserving the evidence, set him on the path toward a larger struggle against the pervasive disrespect that had begun to plague his neighborhood. Even as he sipped his cooling coffee, his gaze remained locked on his tainted garden, a silent promise forming that he would soon reclaim the dignity and respect his home deserved. After documenting the unwelcome intrusion, Daniel Morgan's determination led him to confront the source of the violation. With evidence in hand and a heavy heart, he set off down the short walk to Eric Turner's house. In Daniel's eyes, every step symbolized his refusal to accept the erosion of his personal space without challenge. When Daniel reached the weathered door of Eric Turner's modest home, he knocked firmly. The door opened to reveal Eric in a rumpled t-shirt and casual shorts, his demeanor marked by immediate impatience. With little preamble, Eric's eyes flicked toward Daniel, and a curt greeting was exchanged. "Good morning," Eric grunted, leaning casually against the door frame as if his attitude could compensate for the blatant disregard for property boundaries. Trying to keep his tone neutral, Daniel asked, "I noticed a car parked on my lawn this morning. Is that yours, Eric?" The question, simple and matter-of-fact, hung in the cool air. For a brief moment, time seemed to still as Daniel waited for an explanation. Eric's response was brusque and dismissive. With a nonchalant shrug, he confirmed that the SUV was indeed his. Then, almost as if rehearsed, he remarked, "It's on my property too, there's plenty of room. I'm not sure why it's a big deal." Daniel was taken aback by Eric's blatant dismissal. In that moment, the conversational veneer fell away, revealing a deeper layer of disrespect. For Daniel, this wasn't merely about a parked car, it was about the continuous violation of personal boundaries and the implicit message that his carefully maintained space was of little consequence to those who behaved recklessly. Struggling to contain his frustration, Daniel calmly pointed out that the vehicle's repeated parking had damaged his lawn, flattened blades of grass, disrupted flower beds, and tire tracks that marred the pristine landscape he had worked so hard to create. Eric, however, scoffed at the mention of property damage. "Boundaries, Daniel? Really? It's just a bit of grass. You need to get over it," he retorted, dismissing the tangible harm caused by his actions. The exchange grew terse, with both parties entrenched in their positions. Daniel's heart pounded with a mix of anger and determination. Though Eric's tone was laden with casual insolence, every word confirmed to Daniel that this incident was just one in a series of repeated offenses, an overt symbol of the complete lack of respect for his home and property. Before leaving, Daniel made a silent vow to himself: if the transgressions continued unchecked, he would not only document them but escalate the matter further. With his digital camera still capturing the evidence and his mind whirling with plans for a proper resolution, Daniel turned away from Eric's doorstep, his resolve hardening in the face of blatant dismissal. As he walked back home, every step was marked by the determination to safeguard his personal sanctuary. The confrontation with Eric had been brief, but it laid bare a troubling truth: without firm action, the persistent disregard for property boundaries would only lead to greater conflicts, and Daniel knew he would have to fight for every inch of his home's dignity. Returning home after his terse confrontation with Eric Turner, Daniel Morgan was greeted not by the calm he once knew, but by a scene of disarray that left his heart heavy with dismay. His once immaculate lawn, the pride of his suburban sanctuary, bore unmistakable signs of deliberate defacement. Deep, dark tire tracks crisscrossed the soft, green turf, and patches of splintered grass had been trampled into the soil. The damage was extensive, more than an accidental misstep, it appeared to be a calculated act of disregard for his hard-earned property. Standing at the edge of his garden, Daniel knelt and ran his fingers gently over the damaged grass, feeling the raw texture of soil upturned in anger. Every ridge and tear in the lawn was a tangible testament to repeated violations, a visual record of Eric Turner's persistent transgressions that could no longer be overlooked. The garden, which had once symbolized peace, now felt like a battlefield where personal respect was under siege. Determined not to let this act go unchallenged, Daniel resolved to gather even more comprehensive evidence. The day's light lent clarity to every detail, the precise imprints left by the SUV's tires, the uneven patches where grass had been uprooted, and even the subtle disturbances in the pattern of flower beds lining the border. Daniel systematically took pictures from various angles, ensuring that every aspect of the damage was documented. His careful efforts were not just about proving a point, they were a crucial step in protecting his rights as a homeowner. As he worked, Daniel's thoughts churned with the significance of the moment. This was no longer a mere inconvenience, it was a relentless assault on his personal sanctuary. The lawn had always been more than just grass, it was a place where his children played, where family gatherings took place, and where the fruits of years of labor were proudly displayed. To see that space defiled so callously by a neighbor's vehicle was deeply personal and profoundly infuriating. With his camera rolling and evidence meticulously compiled, Daniel began to strategize his next move. He knew that further direct confrontation with Eric Turner might only provoke more hostility. Instead, he decided that action needed to be taken through the proper channels. The logical next step was to report the continuous property violations to the HOA, hoping that the Homeowners Association, whose role was to uphold community standards, would take decisive action. Yet, deep in his heart, Daniel sensed that he would face the same dismissive attitude that had greeted him earlier. Nevertheless, the damage to his lawn was irrefutable, and it spurred him on. Daniel sat for a moment in reflective silence, absorbing the full extent of the assault on his property, and then resolved that he must be the one to bring about change. He began drafting a detailed log of incidents, noting dates, times, and descriptions of each violation. Every piece of evidence, from the high-resolution photographs to the detailed notes he made about each mark in the lawn, was a building block in his case. As the day progressed, Daniel's sense of determination grew. His quiet, methodical documentation was not simply a response to a single act of vandalism, it was the prelude to a broader battle against a culture of disrespect that had taken root in his community. The defacement of his lawn by Eric Turner was a flagrant symbol of unchecked disregard, and Daniel was ready to ensure that this injustice would not continue unchallenged. In that critical moment, standing amid the evidence of carelessness and deliberate sabotage, Daniel Morgan resolved to fight for every inch of his home. The confrontation with poor treatment had forged within him an unwavering commitment to reclaiming his sanctuary. He knew that the struggle ahead might be arduous, but armed with irrefutable evidence and a spirit that refused to yield, Daniel was prepared to take the next step in his quest for justice. With the extensive documentation of property damage now in hand, Daniel Morgan felt both the weight of injustice and the stirrings of a resolve that refused to be silenced. The next logical step in reclaiming his personal sanctuary was to confront the very system that was supposed to ensure fair play in his community, the Homeowners Association. Determined to have his voice heard, Daniel prepared to present his case to the HOA, despite knowing that previous encounters had left him disheartened by the association's dismissive attitude. Earlier that day, Daniel had diligently compiled his evidence. Dozens of high-resolution photographs capturing the brutal tire tracks, detailed notes on the progressive destruction of his lawn, and even videos that documented the repeated trespassing incidents by Eric Turner's SUV. Every image, every handwritten record was meticulously organized into a comprehensive dossier, a silent yet powerful testimony against the ongoing violations. Arriving at the sleek, modern office of the HOA, Daniel felt a mix of trepidation and determination. The reception area, with its polished marble and carefully arranged community awards, seemed worlds apart from the disarray that had invaded his home. In this environment of supposed order and fairness, Daniel's evidence stood as a stark contradiction to the preferential treatment that he and many of his neighbors had long suffered. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was stiff and formal. Seated behind a large mahogany table was Karen, the HOA chairperson, whose reputation for enforcing strict yet arbitrary rules was well known. As Daniel laid his dossier on the table, he tried to maintain a calm demeanor while his inner turmoil threatened to overwhelm him. "Karen, I have documented a series of unauthorized parking violations and property damage that have repeatedly affected my lawn," he began, his voice steady yet resonant with frustration. "These records clearly show that Eric Turner's SUV has trespassed on my property, causing significant harm." Karen, true to her reputation, responded with a dismissive smile. "Daniel, while I appreciate your concern, these appear to be minor infractions. We're all neighbors here, and such incidents, though unfortunate, should not be escalated." Her tone implied that the very evidence before her was negligible, a trivial matter in the grand scheme of community living. Undeterred, Daniel countered with precision. "With all due respect, Karen, this is not about minor disagreements. This is about the consistent and repeated violation of my property boundaries. If we allow this behavior to continue unchecked, it sets a dangerous precedent for the rest of our community." He pointed to the detailed logs and photographs that chronicled the ongoing assault on his yard, his words punctuating the serious nature of the problem. Across the room, a few neighbors, having been discreetly present, exchanged looks of understanding and support. For many, Daniel's evidence resonated with their own experiences of overlooking similar transgressions over the years. The boardroom, once a symbol of authority and order, began to pulse with a quiet unrest. Karen's smile faltered slightly as Daniel continued, "I have consulted with legal counsel, and I am well within my rights to expect that my property remains respected. The documentation you see here is irrefutable." Her demeanor, once so assured, now carried a hint of uncertainty. Still, she clung to the standard script about community harmony, suggesting that perhaps personal grievances should be resolved amicably rather than through formal channels. In that tense moment, Daniel's determination only grew stronger. "Respect for property isn't a negotiable aspect of community living, Karen. If this behavior remains unchecked, I fear it will lead to further abuses that will affect us all." His voice, though measured, carried the conviction of someone who had endured too much suppression for too long. Unable to ignore the mounting evidence and the supportive murmurs of a few residents, the board reluctantly promised to look into the matter. As Daniel left the office that day, he knew that this confrontation was only the beginning. Though Karen had managed to deflect his complaint for the moment, the seeds of dissent were sown, both within the HOA and among the wider community. Daniel Morgan's battle for respect was far from over, and his meticulous documentation had set the stage for a larger struggle against systemic indifference. In the wake of the contentious HOA meeting, the atmosphere in Harmony Glades underwent a dramatic transformation. What began as Daniel Morgan's personal fight to reclaim his property soon ignited a broader uprising among residents long constrained by arbitrary rules. Over the following days, the once silent neighbors found their voices, and these voices were unified in their indignation against what they now saw as an overreaching, dismissive HOA under Karen's leadership. As word of Daniel's plight spread throughout the neighborhood, conversations that were once hushed in private gardens and over kitchen tables quickly became shared outcries. Many residents recalled instances where their own property rights had been compromised, unauthorized constructions, needless fines, and other inequitable practices that had been swept under the rug in the name of community harmony. Those who had once remained quiet, intimidated by the formidable presence of the HOA, now began to speak up. Determined to harness this collective discontent, Daniel organized a series of informal gatherings at a local park. Under the shade of old oak trees, residents met not as adversaries but as allies, sharing their stories of grievances and outlining the oppressive practices they had all endured. "This isn't just about one SUV or a single piece of damaged grass," Daniel proclaimed during one such meeting, his voice resonating with both resolve and empathy. "It's about standing up for our right to live freely in our own homes." At these meetings, a palpable sense of community emerged. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves now bonded over shared frustration. The evidence Daniel had gathered became the rallying banner for the movement. Photographs, detailed logs, and video footage were circulated in local forums and community groups, and soon a groundswell of support was evident. Residents began to demand accountability from the HOA and, specifically, from Karen. Local social media channels buzzed with activity as Daniel's case spread beyond the confines of Harmony Glades. Blog posts, discussion threads, and even a few local news segments highlighted the injustice, painting a picture of a community tired of arbitrary rules and the heavy-handed tactics of an unresponsive board. The collective sentiment was unmistakable: if one homeowner's rights were trampled upon, then everyone's were at risk. As the days passed, the energy in the neighborhood reached a fever pitch. Spurred by a newfound solidarity, residents began to organize a peaceful protest outside the HOA headquarters. Colorful signs reading, "Respect our space," and "Property rights for all," were held high by neighbors whose faces, determined and hopeful, underscored a powerful message of unity and resistance. Amid the growing pressure, even some board members, once loyal to Karen, found themselves questioning the long-standing policies that had governed their community. Rumors swirled that the recent string of grievances, now joined by Daniel's documented evidence, might force the HOA to reconsider its stance. What had once seemed like isolated incidents were now recognized as symptoms of a broader systemic failure. For Daniel, each new show of support, each neighbor who stepped forward to share their own story, was a reaffirmation of his cause. The movement was no longer about one man's battle against an irresponsible neighbor; it had evolved into a powerful collective demand for fairness, transparency, and respect in Harmony Glades. In every conversation, every public gathering, the message was clear: the days of silent suffering under arbitrary fines and dismissive authority were numbered. The united front that the residents now presented was a formidable force, one that promised to reshape HOA policies and ensure that no one's sanctuary would ever again be so casually disrespected. And so, with the rising tide of community support, Daniel Morgan's fight had become a beacon of hope, and of defiance, challenging entrenched power and ushering in an era of collective empowerment. The momentum built by Daniel Morgan's efforts and the subsequent neighborhood uprising reached its apex during the long-anticipated formal hearing. On the day of the hearing, the community center of Harmony Glades was packed with residents whose unity had crystallized through weeks of shared grievances. The chamber buzzed with nervous energy and hopeful determination, as every attendee knew that the outcome could transform their neighborhood forever. Daniel, steadfast and resolute, took the stand with his comprehensive dossier at hand. Dressed simply but with quiet authority, he began to lay out the case before the HOA panel. He presented a detailed chronology of events. The repeated unauthorized parking of Eric Turner's SUV, the extensive damage inflicted on his lawn, and the mounting evidence he had meticulously recorded over days and weeks. His narrative was punctuated by high-resolution photographs, video recordings, and personal testimonies from several fellow residents. As Daniel spoke, his voice resonated with the passion of a man who had been pushed to his limits by years of bureaucratic indifference. "This isn't merely a matter of a misplaced car," he asserted, "but a blatant disregard for the rights and property of every homeowner in this community." His words were measured yet forceful, compelling the audience to confront the reality of the situation. The panel, which included longtime board members and representatives of the HOA, listened intently. At the helm was Karen, whose reputation for rigid enforcement and dismissive responses was well known. Initially, Karen tried to deflect the mounting evidence by citing community guidelines and emphasizing the need for neighborly compromise. However, as Daniel methodically presented his indisputable evidence, even some of Karen's staunch supporters began to waver. The clarity and consistency of his documentation left little room for doubt. During the hearing, several residents took the opportunity to voice their own experiences. One neighbor, visibly moved, recounted how a series of minor violations had gradually eroded their sense of security. Another detailed how seemingly insignificant infractions, when left unchecked, had forced them to endure a daily sense of humiliation and neglect. The cumulative effect of these testimonies created a powerful narrative of community discontent, a story that could no longer be ignored by the panel. At a pivotal moment, Daniel played a short video clip capturing Eric Turner's repeated incidents of trespassing on his property. The clip, paired with his precise written logs, stunned the panel into silence. Even Karen, who had spent years dismissing such complaints as petty matters, could not ignore the weight of the evidence laid before her. The room fell into a heavy hush as the undeniable facts took center stage. In the final phase of the hearing, the panel deliberated for what felt like an eternity. When the decision was finally announced, it was a decisive moment for Harmony Glades. The HOA ruled that Eric Turner would be fined substantially for each violation and that his vehicle would remain impounded until full compliance was achieved. More significantly, the panel declared that the board's handling of the situation under Karen's supervision was severely flawed. Amid mounting pressure from the community, Karen was forced to tender her resignation, and an interim board, comprising residents known for their commitment to fairness and transparency, was installed. For Daniel, the ruling was not merely a personal victory, it was a beacon of hope for every homeowner who had suffered in silence. The judgment validated his painstaking efforts to preserve his property and reassert dignity over his life. As the meeting closed, applause erupted among the attendees, signaling that a long-overdue change had finally arrived. The oppressive practices that had once undermined the sense of security in Harmony Glades were on the verge of being dismantled, replaced by a renewed commitment to respect and community accountability. In the days following the formal hearing, Harmony Glades began to feel transformed. With Karen's resignation and the swift installation of a new, resident-led HOA board, a palpable change swept through the neighborhood. The oppressive atmosphere that had once constrained every homeowner slowly began to dissolve, replaced by an emerging sense of unity and hope. For Daniel Morgan, the personal struggle he had waged was now part of a larger victory. No longer was his lawn a battleground for arbitrary fines and unchecked violations, it was quickly returning to the state of care it once enjoyed. Neighbors, emboldened by the recent changes and by Daniel's unwavering perseverance, began to share stories of past frustrations, and many expressed relief at the new era that had dawned for Harmony Glades. The new board wasted no time in reviewing and revising outdated regulations. Meetings were held with an open forum format, allowing residents to voice their concerns freely. The atmosphere was collaborative rather than authoritarian, and for the first time in years, every homeowner felt that their rights and opinions were being truly respected. Daniel's house, once a symbol of conflict, soon became a beacon of community empowerment. His meticulous documentation and steadfast resolve had not only led to tangible repercussions against Eric Turner's repeated trespasses but had also spurred a series of reforms that promoted transparency and fairness. The impounded vehicle, a stark reminder of past transgressions, stood as a silent testament to the power of collective action. As he walked through his rejuvenated garden one sunny morning, Daniel could feel the change in the air. The vibrant green of the lawn, carefully restored after weeks of neglect, was symbolic of the fresh start that now characterized Harmony Glades. The community, once divided by fear and indifference, now shared a united vision for the future, one in which respect for personal property was non-negotiable, and where every resident had a voice. In that new dawn of peace and transparency, Daniel Morgan felt a deep, personal satisfaction. The struggle for justice had not only reclaimed his property rights but also sparked a movement that promised long-term improvements for everyone in the neighborhood. His quiet victory was celebrated in small gatherings, friendly exchanges, and the hope that the oppressive past was finally being left behind. As the season turned and Harmony Glades embraced a renewed spirit of community, Daniel looked forward to a future defined by inclusivity, respect, and shared responsibility, a future where no one would ever again have to fight alone for what was right. At the height of the neighborhood upheaval, Daniel Morgan knew the final step was to take his case into a formal legal arena. The community's growing dissatisfaction, bolstered by his painstakingly gathered evidence, had created pressure for accountability that could no longer be contained within informal grievances. Armed with his comprehensive dossier, a collection of photographs, video recordings, and detailed logs of Eric Turner's repeated trespasses, Daniel prepared for the next stage of his fight. He worked late into the night, organizing every piece of evidence into a coherent narrative that painted an irrefutable picture of neglect and injustice. His documentation was not only thorough but also methodically dated and cross-referenced, ensuring that every violation could be verified with precision. The legal consultation that followed was rigorous. Daniel met with a respected attorney who, after reviewing the evidence, assured him that the case was strong enough to compel the local authorities to take action. His attorney explained that such a case, one that involved ongoing property violations and breaches of HOA regulations, could set a precedent that would benefit all homeowners in Harmony Glades. Buoyed by this encouragement, Daniel filed an official complaint with the local municipal court. The filing process was painstaking, but Daniel knew that every extra detail mattered. His evidence was presented in court as a clear demonstration of a pattern of harassment and disregard for property rights. During the hearing, Daniel was called to the stand, where his calm, precise testimony further solidified the legitimacy of his claims. He recounted the numerous incidents, his confrontation with Eric Turner, and the dismissive, even malicious, attitude of Karen when he sought help. The courtroom was silent as Daniel's evidence was meticulously reviewed, a silence punctuated only by the occasional nod from a sympathetic juror. After hours of deliberation, the judge issued a ruling in Daniel's favor. The court ordered that Eric Turner pay substantial fines for each documented violation and mandated that any future trespass on Daniel's property would be met with immediate legal action. Additionally, the judgment reinforced the rights of homeowners and held the HOA accountable for its previous lackluster response. The legal victory, while deeply personal to Daniel, resonated throughout Harmony Glades. The ruling not only vindicated his actions but also sent a clear message to anyone who might think to disregard the rights of their neighbors. For Daniel, the courtroom had become a battleground where justice was finally served, a place where his quiet, determined fight against bureaucratic neglect and invasive behavior had been affirmed by the law. In the final phase of this long, hard-fought battle, the community of Harmony Glades began to experience the tangible results of Daniel Morgan's perseverance. Following the legal victory and the unanimous decision at the HOA meeting, a palpable shift swept through the neighborhood. No longer was the spirit of oppression enforced by arbitrary fines and dismissive authority. Instead, a new era of fair and inclusive governance was dawning. Daniel, now widely respected as both a defender of property rights and a catalyst for change, emerged as a unifying force. The once embattled members of the community rallied behind him, celebrating the restoration of their personal spaces and the rebalancing of power within the HOA. The impounded SUV, once a symbol of disrespect, was removed from public sight, and long-neglected lawns were restored with the care and attention they deserved. The new HOA board, comprised largely of residents who had experienced the hardships of the past years, instituted a range of reforms. They revised outdated policies, eliminated overly restrictive rules, and, most importantly, established a transparent, community-first approach to governance. These changes were not merely procedural, they transformed the daily lives of every homeowner in Harmony Glades, ensuring that respect and inclusivity took center stage. For Daniel, the victory was deeply personal. His journey, from the discovery of the unauthorized parking to the legal showdown, had restored not only his property's dignity but also his sense of self-worth. Neighbors, once wary and subdued, now greeted him with warm smiles and words of gratitude. The town square, formerly a symbol of bureaucratic indifference, had become a gathering place where residents celebrated their newfound freedom and shared hopes for the future. In one particularly moving moment, during a neighborhood celebration in the freshly green park, Daniel addressed the crowd with a heartfelt speech. "Today," he said, "we reclaim our right to live peacefully, with our homes respected and our voices heard." His words resonated deeply with everyone present, marking the end of an era dominated by arbitrary control and the beginning of one defined by fairness and community spirit. As the sun set on Harmony Glades, the air buzzed with optimism. The once oppressive landscape was now filled with laughter, open dialogue, and the promise of lasting change. For Daniel Morgan, the victory was not the end of his journey but the start of a new chapter, one where he and his community would work hand in hand to protect what mattered most, their homes, their rights, and the precious peace that defined their suburban life. In the glow of that hopeful evening, Daniel smiled as he looked out over a neighborhood reborn, a living testament to the power of unity, the importance of resilience, and the enduring truth that real change begins when brave individuals stand up for what is right.